At this stage, let's move into the first item. Mr. Wargo?
Ms. Rutgers, would you
Yes.
please call?
Tonight, all of our applications are routine. We have 4 routine applications. ED 10, Board of Education, approval to use $7,500 for playground equipment replacement. FI1, Finance Department, a transfer of $75,000, a payment in lieu of taxes. This is to cover higher sewer taxes due to the revaluation. PR1, Parks and Recreation, a transfer of $700, advances for petty cash, which would be used for marine operations, and SE16, Office of the First Selectman, $8,667.99 for property damage settlement, and I move these 4 applications.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Right.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just before we move on to the next item, just wanted to let everybody know I was approached by Dave DeAndrea representing the Chickahominy Association. There were some questions about the resurfacing. It's a 15-year life cycle for the surfacing, a 5-year restriping, and the Chickahominy Association is also providing to the Parks and Rec Foundation a $5,000 donation in addition to the $7,500 for ongoing maintenance.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walko. Mr. Gwartney, Assessor's Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have my report, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you have about it.
Mr. Figger.
In the section about the assessment appeal, were there any trends that you saw out of those appeals in particular locations?
Bill, I'm not sure your mic is on.
Sorry about that.
Right.
Were there any trends that you saw in the assessment appeals, the ones that were granted, with regard to whether they were residential reductions in a particular area of town, the reasons for that, some of the commercial reductions as well?
There was one residential district in particular that received a number of reductions. That was the only anomaly. Otherwise, it was fairly much spread.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Dorkin.
Yes, Mr. Bartney. First, I appreciate you putting together the chart for the litigation in 2005 reval, which we talked about in the last meeting. But for the future, perhaps you could put it into sort of the similar kind of column basis with both the 2005 value and then the owner's value, and then revise so we can begin to see that over time the way you've done with the other one. I think that's been a great chart, so maybe that could sort of be mirror that. Is that possible?
That's my plan. There have been no revisions thus far, so there was nothing to report. And I don't have all the information about the owners, but I'll try to assemble that so that I can present that at least.
Okay, great. Mr. Mayor, I have another question on your chart near the back. First, I want to thank you for including the chart on the Board of Assessment Appeals decisions. I think that was very constructive. But I did have a question on the your comparison table that you have under the type of property, real estate use land, 600, and I see that declined to a percent change that you had is 45%. So it declined by approximately $5 million on a $9 million base. Can you explain what those declines might be in use land, which I assume means it's gone into some kind of taxable? Is that the Rockefeller properties?
That's the last column, the 600 and 800 column.
Well, I'm on this chart.
Okay. In terms,
I'm under type property, real estate, use land, 600.
That was reclassification. There was actually if you look on the last page, you'll see use land again. There were 0 properties appealed and no changes made. That was reclassification that occurred from one grand list to the next grand list. There was actually no change in value per se. It was just moved from one category to a different category.
So they moved from being in the use program to being properties that were either up for sale or had been sold as for development?
Yes, or into a different type of category for some reason.
Thank you.
I think that you'll notice that public utilities went up. And my guess is that probably we shifted some use land that was owned by hydro from use land into utility.
Thank you.
If no one else is going to ask it or make a note of it, Ted, I'd like to just get a little clarification from you without divulging trade secrets. Under the personal property section, you indicated that you're going to be looking at businesses ripe for audit. What do you mean? When does a property or a business become ripe for audit in your terms?
We observe that in checking returns one year to the next, that sometimes some properties seem to drop dramatically without it being reported as a removal of an asset. So the question becomes, well, why did it go down so much? And that would be one that we might want to audit.
Okay.
Other ones that might be ripe for audit would be ones that seem to be unusual for their particular category of property, whereas typically we find a larger amount of assets in one type of business compared to another.
Okay. Good. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Liaison reports?
We need a motion to
I'm sorry.
accept.
Sorry about that.
I move we accept
Yes.
the assessor's report.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's 10-0. Thank you. Okay. Committee and liaison reports? Ms. Torkington?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. The HR Committee April 12th meeting was attended by all members and Mr. Minarski, Controller. The committee discussed the reports prepared by the Finance and HR departments. The committee continues to raise questions about information in the reports. As an example, as a result of ongoing reviews of the vacant position report and continuing vacancies within the police department, uniform patrol, the HR committee became aware of the lack of slots at the State Police Academy for required basic training for Greenwich Police hiring. Mr. Norton took on the responsibility at the March HR committee meeting to investigate this. As a result of his investigations, at the April meeting, he reported 8 academy slots have since been obtained, and that should speed necessary police officer recruit hiring. So I think that's, shows some progress of looking at data and what can we learn from the data and what are our next steps. And I'd also like, shall I give the report on the MC? The MC Pay Plan Committee selected the Hay Group as the consultant for the MC Pay Plan Update, which is the position benchmarking and compensation study. The Purchasing Department was instructed to proceed with the required agreement and the insurance documentation. Ms. Cast, in the interim, is working together with the department heads to prepare the required data package, including updated position descriptions, if necessary, and any other information that might be needed. The first meeting with Hay Group should occur in mid-May, and the pay plan update study is expected to take approximately 12 weeks, which is what we had talked about before. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions on that report? Okay, thank you. Mr. Walco, your report. Want to report on the Building Committee and the RISE Committee as well?
Right, I'll be brief. The RISE Committee, just to give everybody an update as to where we are, both Larry Simon and I are members of the committee. I'm also a member of the steering committee, which helps sort of funnel all of the various subgroups or subcommittees. We have elected to proceed with 4 subcommittees in addition to the steering committee, and that is the site visit subcommittee, the data subcommittee, the communications subcommittee, and the story and culture subcommittee. Story and culture will be developing little vignettes about each school and developing the historical background of each school. The communications committee is working on the flow of information, especially when we start getting into options. The data subcommittee, of which Mr. Simon and I are members, is looking at all of the data requests and making sure that the data that's produced is data that's relevant to the discussion. And the site visit, which is probably the sexiest of all the subcommittees, goes out and visits various schools that we would look at in terms of what programs they're running. The reports of the subcommittee should be back to the full group sometime in May. There'll be public hearings, and then we'll start emerging some options will be emerging as a result of those subcommittee reports. In June, they would like to see community engagement, Board of Ed reports, and then in July and August, refining the options, and then September, finalizing the options and presenting it to the Board of Ed. As you all know, the Board of Ed is the agency that is going to be finalizing these options and actually recommending the options. So that's an update on the RISE committee. Any questions on that? HAMAV Building Committee, it appears that there is some delay. I think it is more likely than not that the school will not open in September, although that still remains to be seen. And there's some difference of opinion. We're still working to try to get it open, although I think there are more questions than answers with respect to when the school will be open in terms of whether it'll be for September 1st or thereabouts, the opening of school. In addition, it appears that we will be receiving a request for an interim appropriation in addition to the previous amounts that were allocated for this project, and that should be coming to us most likely May for a June RTM meeting. Any questions?
Any questions?
A question for
Right.
Steve, if I
Right.
may. Steve, if what you say is true and the school doesn't open for September, presumably the students remain in the modulars. What's the implication for Glenville? Does that mean we're getting another set of modulars or not starting?
I think that's a question for the Board of Ed.
No, okay.
I'm just on the HAMAV Building Committee. Peter Tessie is on the Glenville Building Committee. In all of our committee discussions, we do not discuss the implications of our actions relative to Glenville or any other school building projects, but I think it's certainly a legitimate question. I think it's one of the major questions. I think, quite frankly, the Board of Ed is going to have to answer that one.
Thanks.
Okay. I'll cover the Audit Committee and then very briefly the Retirement Board. First, the Audit Committee met on the 12th. As a result of our continuing review of accidents involving town-owned vehicles and equipment, Fire Department was asked to update the committee on practices and procedures for training. We came away with the impression that sound procedures are now in place to further the trend, which has clearly been established, toward reduction of such events. Most importantly, we believe that department management is continuing to assess the situation and its own practices. We were updated by Ron Lally and Ed Gomo of the Office of the First Selectman concerning procedures that have now been put in place and are being put in place as we talk concerning findings resulting from the payroll audit of last year. Major departments whose payroll activities have been recently centralized are filing such reports with the payroll division of HR. Several other departments not yet part of the centralization will be maintaining such records. Additional progress on dealing with the findings of the payroll audit is expected, and we've scheduled another update at our June meeting. We continued a review of the practices concerning review of contracts by purchasing department for the town. As a result of various points raised during our last meeting with the purchasing director, we reviewed and made final adjustments to various types of information that will be requested from prospective contractors. Eventually, this will be forwarded to the purchasing department with a request that it be incorporated into their procedures. As reported last month, the town attorney is in the process of determining the ability of the town to proactively take measures based upon information gathered from and concerning prospective contractors. Finally, the committee reviewed the interview process concerning firms responding to the RFP for engagement of independent auditor. Concerning the retirement board, that board took no action of note during its April meeting. Any questions? Thank you.
I have one comment.
Yes.
I am working with Jim Levin and Al Cava and Gail Sasso on the retirement board standard plan document. And the plan is eventually, like in May, to present this document first to the retirement board, which then can approve it, and then to the BET, which can then approve it. And according to the charter, that will be sufficient to change the document. Now, this is a 43-page document that that's been changed considerably to conform to what the collective bargaining agreements have stated in the current practices and some interpretation. So I think everybody has to decide whether or not we want to have a special meeting for this or how people want to deal with reading this document. And this, because I would expect that sometime in June or July or September we will approve this, and that's for everyone's thought. But, you know, it's 43 pages. I've been working on this document for 6.5 months and think I now understand it, so it's not reasonable to expect that everybody's going to understand this document in any short time period. And so I'd like any suggestions as to how you would like to proceed, which I'm not asking for necessarily tonight, but over the next month to be given to me.
So should the members simply determine between now and next month whether or not they feel a separate meeting is in order?
Well, a separate meeting or,
An agenda item.
I mean, I could pass out send everybody a copy of the document in a draft form, but it's, without any kind of an explanation, it's virtually incomprehensible.
Right.
It's as sad as that is to say. And I think it would be best to have either at a regular meeting, we have a briefing for an hour or 45 minutes, and then people can read it and ask questions, or some process.
Well, we expect you to be making a suggestion along those lines then. Okay.
Mr.
Right.
Chair,
Right.
if I may.
Yeah.
Just as a matter of timing, the retirement board meets May 24th, and upon hearing Larry's comments, the retirement board may want some time also to look at the document, and you might not get the document until June or July. So I would probably suggest that we see how and two of you are liaisons, how the retirement board reacts to it at the February 24th meeting. I'm sorry, the May 24th meeting.
Okay. Good. Okay, good suggestion.
But that's why I
Okay.
said June, July, or September.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, thanks for alerting us to that. Okay. Mr. Minorski, on the controller's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. The flash report was emailed to the board today, and as a backup, I've made copies, and everybody should have a flash report copy in front of you. You have a copy of the April controller's report, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have at this point.
Mr. Walco?
Peter, just so I understand the process on the North Miami Sewer project. So you think that this is going to come to us next month?
The timing, Ed Gomo and myself, and we are working with Robinson and Cole in drafting the resolution to put the numbers into it, which will reflect the potential approximately $600,000 reduction. The plan is to have it to the BET for the May meeting and the RTM for the June meeting.
Robinson and Cole represents the town?
In this particular resolution, they're also currently doing bond counsel work on the $11 million bond sale.
So who's making this request? And I just want to make, when I ask that question, I'm just trying to make sure that the right people are here for our discussion.
I will probably be coming forward in the form of a controller certification.
Okay. Are we going to need either the town attorney or the town administrator there?
I don't know. I believe Ed is leaving around the middle of May. I can't cover the history going back 3 or 4 years. What I can do is I can provide you with a copy of the Pinnacle 1 audit, which is pretty clear, straightforward. And I believe, I would suggest and recommend that Wayne Fox attend, because Wayne was the final person who consulted with the North Miami group and came to the agreement for the $600,000 reduction.
And so this would go before the Budget Committee as any item would?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right. Mike?
Just as a, thank you, as a follow-up question to that, where do you anticipate this coming from? Where are we going to appropriate this 600 from?
Well, the Sewer Improvement Fund does have retained earnings. There are a couple $1 million in there. So the money can potentially come from the retained earnings of the Sewer Improvement Fund.
Mr. Simon?
That was my saying, I had the same question. And that's funded half by the town and half by the sewer improvement fund?
For annually, but it does have a fund balance, and technically the term is retained earnings in the Sewer Improvement Fund built up. So there is a surplus in that fund
And a sufficient surplus?
to cover $594,000, yes.
Thank you.
Does that include interest? The 594, does that include interest?
That is a straight reduction from the total cost. And on top of that, there's an accrued interest figure on the base amount going all the way through December 31st of 2007.
How far back?
I believe it was December of '03.
So
It's 5 years of accrued interest at approximately $793,000 a year. So to answer your question, the interest is based on the net amount, which is a reduction of the 594.
does the town have to pay interest on the 594?
I'm not sure I understand.
I turn
This
to
will
my
be-
translator.
Well, no, I think this is the discussion that we're going to need to have next month when we have everything in front of us. And I think we've talked about this previously, which is interest has been accruing as a result of the failure to certify the costs.
Correct.
And so I think Mr. Simon's point is, first of all, who's paying for the interest in general, but then what about the interest on the 594?
Okay, that has to be decided where that comes from.
By whom?
BET, I presume.
Those aren't legal questions?
Oh, well, when Wayne and I come to before the board, we'll be prepared, and we'll probably ask for any questions prior to the meeting so that we don't have a debate over which cost should be in and which cost should be out.
I think at least from the Budget Committee's perspective, we're going to, you already know some of these questions.
Yes.
Which are where the allocation of interest and then some of the history behind this amount and how the amount was arrived at, and then the legality of the allocation of interest payments.
Okay.
But you're asking for other questions to come from non-budget committee members as well.
Well, I mean, just like any other item, we're seeing it here, we know it's coming, so if anybody has questions, just like any other item.
That was the purpose, is to throw that out there
Right.
to make you aware of what's coming next month.
Correct. Good point.
Right, but you don't want to start getting questions on the Monday before the Budget Committee hearing.
No.
Right.
And we don't get the packet sometimes till Friday, so now would be a good time.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions of the Controller? Right, Mr. Mason?
Actually, it's for you, Peter, on the Treasurer's report. On the risk fund?
No, we're not there yet.
That's next.
Well,
He's waiting for the treasurer.
He'll be defending the Treasurer's report. Okay. Any other questions concerning the Controller's report?
I move to
Okay.
accept
Do
it.
we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Who seconded?
Okay.
Mr. Simon?
Simon.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 10-0. Thank you. Treasurer's report? Any questions concerning the Treasurer's report? Mr. Mason?
I'll go first. On the risk fund, when do you do the bookings? So we've had, obviously, we've been using that fund a little bit. When do you do the transfer out of that back to wherever we're making payments out of? Right now, I assume with some of the settlements we've had, you're going into the risk fund, you're going to put that back over to the general fund for payments you've made. When do we do that? How often do we do that?
The budgetary transfer?
Yeah.
That's done in July of each year.
Only done in July?
The funding is done in July, and as the
Not what he
payments,
asked.
and the payments out, when I get the authorization from the law department to pay.
Okay, so we've had some of those this fiscal year, and there's nothing, showing up as, going out on that.
On
We have
page two-
appreciation.
Page 2, the transfers are a net. If you take the $1.5 million and subtract the 900 and change, that's the difference. There was the Peters case for 400,000 plus the Connecticut Resources Recovery for 100,000. So that transfer number on the second page is net of the $1.5 million.
Thank you.
Any other questions concerning the treasurer's report? Mr. Simon?
So I looked at the OPEB account, and I asked to meet with Mr. Menardsky and the treasurer on Wednesday. It was my understanding that our goal was to get the equity part of the OPEB account up to 50%, and I can't quite understand the way in which money keeps getting allocated both to U.S. Trust and to the equity without getting up to the 50% yet. And that's the purpose of the meeting.
Okay, and I could just real quickly, the intent was to draw down $500,000 a month from the U.S. Trust account, transfer to the Vanguard domestic equity and international equity, and then in the month that you don't need the total $500,000, we would true it up to make it 50-40, 10% allocation. There's 1 month left. The confusion might be that we got two sources of revenue in at the last minute for approximately $150,000 each, and instead of giving U.S. Trust $150,000 and then pulling it back out, we simply gave the Vanguard properties $150,000, and we only withdrew $350,000. And the total between the transactions was $500,000 for the month. But we can meet Wednesday morning and
Thank you. And
further
also, I want
discuss
to make
it.
sure I understand the due tos and the due froms
Yeah,
in
okay.
this, and to make sure that Kathleen understands that.
It's a good point.
Because, we're going to have over $20 million in this fund. The fund itself, if you look on the second page, is doing very well. We've collected $1.6 million of appreciation through, and our goal, and our budget for the year was $1 million, $1,020,000. But it's very hard for anybody, and I want to make sure especially it's not hard for the treasurer to understand what's going on here. And I understand what you said, but it doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't be putting more money into the equity at the full $500,000. I guess we did that. All right. So, and I'll report back.
So, just for clarification, was there a shortfall, or you're saying that there was no shortfall concerning the amounts that should have been put into the two Vanguard funds?
If you look at the OPEB page 1,
Right.
you can see there's two sources. There's the transfer of $350, and to the left is the additions of $150.
Right.
We simply, instead of two steps, made it one step and put the $150,000 in revenues straight into the Vanguard instead of making two entries.
Right. Okay.
We never anticipated that money, we thought we would have an OPEB balance, money would be appropriated in the beginning of the year, and then we
July.
would just transfer
Sure.
money from one to
Right,
another. We didn't
right.
anticipate money keep coming into the fund and money being transferred, because we thought if we had money coming into the fund, our goal was to get it into balance even sooner,
Okay.
and only transfer out $500,000.
Correct.
But we'll fix this because
Well,
next month.
I think, as I recall, this was brought about because of the temporary holdup in moving monies into the equity area. Is that right? Back in July, when monies were initially appropriated and more money was moved into the U.S. Trust account than otherwise would have been moved in. So we have a situation that was basically initiated by that.
We're getting it fixed.
Right. Okay. Any other questions concerning the treasurer's report? We have a motion to accept it. We have a second? Okay, second by Mr. Hines. Any questions? Any further questions? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? 10-0. Thank you. Approval of BET minutes. First for the regular meeting of March 19th, 2007.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Any questions, Mr. Finger? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Any questions? Any suggestions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 10-0. Next, minutes for the public hearing on the 2007-2008 budget, which took place on March 20th, 2007. Do we have a motion? Ms. Tarkenton? Mr. Norton raised his hand. He'll be second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 10-0. Ms. Rutgers? Yes? Right.
We have to have a motion to take up the decision meeting minutes, which were not on the agenda, so we need a two-thirds vote. Shall I?
Please.
Tarkington moves, I'll
yes,
second that.
Okay.
Can you state the motion?
I move that we take up the minutes for the decision day meeting of March 21.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Walco is seconded. Okay. Any questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay. Any opposed? 10-0, okay.
Okay, and I have one more change to the, to these minutes as I sent them out last night and as they are here at our desks. Ms. Tarkington had asked that I make a change on page 17 on the third paragraph. In the third paragraph in one of her statements, I was changing the second sentence to, "They are also items for which credit would be received," and this was the addition, "as capital improvement projects in the Medicaid rent reimbursement rate." So these minutes would have to be moved with that amendment.
So moved as amended.
Do we have a second? Mr. Simon? Okay. Any further questions? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 10-0. Officers' reports. I have nothing. Ms. Rutgers?
No.
No? Thank you. Is there any old business we have not yet taken up? Any new business? Mr. Walker? I'm sorry, Mr. Simon?
I think we have the same chart.
Okay. Well, we're not, right, this is the new business, I believe.
Under new business, I've had
Yeah.
been able to have a conversation with Mr. Tessie with respect to our spreadsheet here for meetings. He asked if you could please fill it out, especially relative to the committee meetings, making sure that everybody has an interest in attending those meetings in which you serve as liaison, and then generally whether there's a conflict either for Wednesday or Thursday of May 9th or May 10th. And if you can just forward that information either by email or just this hard copy to Peter or Roland, and then he will synthesize it and put it together and then set out the various tasks.
Mr. Chairman,
Peter?
Roland's on vacation this week. Well, play it safe and send them to my email address or through the mail.
Okay,
Or tonight, they can just hand it
I
to you.
have one already.
Okay.
okay, good,
I have one comment.
right?
So we should cross off appointments. They don't meet. No one goes to the appointments committee during the budget process.
Right.
So are we supposed to put our names down next to the committees we want to go to?
That would be helpful. And then Mr. Tessie will then formulate it and see who's going to what committee and try to make determinations if there's a conflict there. One committee has a lot of people wishing to attend.
What about districts?
Districts, he asks that you provide your preference, but then also if you have a conflict with either that Wednesday or that Thursday, and then he will make the assignments accordingly.
So in addition to completing your name next to the various committee and district assignments, one should put down any conflicts, any known conflicts they have on any of those dates.
Generically with the
Okay.
dates.
Great.
That'd be great.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Any additional new business? If not, motion to adjourn? Mr. Norton? Do we have a second? Mr. Finger? Okay. Thank you all. Okay, right.